Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to the first webinar that SFAR is presenting in 2026 for Education and Events series for the year. We are very pleased to welcome Dan Hershkowitz, who's the Vice President of Risk Management for the agency. He is a longtime friend and past president of SFAR, and he is here to usher in the new year with all that we need to know to best support our buyers and sellers in this practice of real estate. So, thank you for joining us today. We have about 100 people who are on the call. We're expecting more. We had a great signups today. So as people trickle in, I'll let Dan go ahead and get started. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. If you don't know, SFAR has a robust video library that can be found through the SFAR website. And please visit that not only for this video, please send it along to people you know who were not able to join us today, but please check it out for other great topics and presentations that we've had in years past. Also, please put your questions in the Q&A. We will monitor that throughout the presentation, and if it seems like a good time for us to hit the pause button to answer a question or two on a particular topic, we may do that, or we may wait to the end, kind of just depending on what we see in front of us. But we will definitely allot some time at the end of the presentation for your questions and comments. Okay, well, thank you again, and Dan, welcome.
Hi, Jeremy. Glad to be here. Thank you, everybody. Antitrust reminder, we have many agents from many different brokerages, so we will not be discussing services that we are going to be providing or not providing. We will not be discussing compensation that we will be charging or not charging. We will keep it to the topic of the new laws. Okay, great. Here we go. Are we ready?
Ready?
What are we going to learn today? Let's go to the next one. Thank you, Genevieve, by the way. Okay, so we have two slides of what we're going to learn. We are going to learn about digitally altered images. Go back, Jen. We are going to learn about HOA balcony inspection reports, third-hand smoke. What is third-hand smoke? I know about first-hand and second-hand. Jeremy, we're going to learn about third-hand smoke. Unsolicited offers in fire-affected zip codes. Well, what is that? That is an LA thing, but I'm just going to show you briefly what that's all about because it's only a matter of time before that sort of thing impacts us in a similar way. Buyer representation agreements, our BRBCs, what do we need to do? How has that changed? Defensible space, well, we all know a little bit about that, but what is zone zero? We were familiar with zones 1, 2, and 3. How did we get a zone zero? And we will learn on the next slide about landlord-tenant laws. And so if you're doing some landlord-tenant work, you're going to learn about refrigerators and stoves and are they required? Security deposits received electronically, how do they get paid? Disaster mediation requirements, there is a fire, for instance. There is an earthquake, what are the responsibilities of the landlord? Indoor temperature standards, well, they are probably coming soon, and will the landlords be required to provide air conditioning? Social Security payment defense, service of process rules for landlord-tenant evictions. Woo! All right, let's get started with an easy one. Jeremy, this one isn't as related to real estate as the others, but it's a fun one anyway. Let's move forward. Aha! Yes, no slide presentation is a worthwhile presentation without kittens or puppies. There is a statewide ban on cat declawing effective January 1st, so you cannot get your cats declawed.
Now, what about the declawing of particular clients or maybe other agents in the field?
It is an interesting question. I think we call that neutering.
That might be outside the scope of this presentation.
It could be. So, but anyhow, you know what's fun about this law is, of course, there's an exception in the life and safety health of the kitten, right? Uh,
Yes, no kittens were harmed in the making of this slide.
that is true, but it took me forever to super glue that little banner to their little paws. Okay,
Hey, at least they have claws helping hold it up.
that is a good point. Okay, let's go forward. We're going to talk about digitally altered images. So, Jeremy, you've probably heard about this, I presume.
Have, yes.
Okay. Has your brokerage been talking about this?
My brokerage has, and in fact, I happen to have a listing that has some digitally altered images that I had to put make sure that I had some up-to-date language on it.
Okay. Let's just find out what the basics are. The basics is, and this is great, by the way, I love this. So, the California legislature has a lot of things to worry about when it comes to digitally altered images, right? So, God knows what's happening with children, right? There's a big story today on X and how they're digitally altering all these photos of children to make sexual content, blah, blah, blah. So, is that what they decided to tackle? No, they started with digitally altered and AI generated photos and images in the practice of real estate sales, as a matter of fact, not even um, leases. However, I would suggest that with your lease, you basically do the same thing. What is the new standard? The standard is this. If you have modified an image, not through typical editing software where you're changing the lighting, for instance, you're enhancing one part and de-emphasizing another part, where you've actually changed or altered the photo, or oddly enough, inserted staging where staging didn't exist, right? Which is just, I think, an overreach. But anyhow, if you've done any of those things, they simply want two things. One is for you to identify that that photo has been enhanced through either digital editing or AI generation. Okay. So one, this photo is AI generated. This photo has been digitally enhanced, right? That's one thing. The other thing they want you to do is give access to the original unadulterated photo. So one way to do this, and let's just say that this was, oh, and by the way, Jeremy, where does this apply? Is this only in the MLS?
Uh, that's a good question, but I guess good practice would say this should be done everywhere, just in case somebody was feeling particularly litigious.
Well, it isn't a just in case. It is, in fact, everywhere, and that's what the law says, right? And oddly enough, this is technically a crime. Now, B&P code section that we cite there references a business practice, right? Business and Professions Code. That's DRE regulations. The DRE has not promulgated any regulations yet, so we still have a reprieve period. But what are you supposed to do every time you have digitally altered a photo? You are supposed to identify that it's been digitally altered and provide access to the original photo. Now, the statute specifically says that you can do that by providing the original photo right next to it, for instance. Or you could use a QR code or a link to the original photo. And so imagine that this wasn't in the MLS, but instead this was a flyer at the property, right? A beautiful photo on the first page that was digitally altered or AI enhanced, right? You changed let's say the color, right? It needed a paint job. You gave it one, right? That's on your flyer. You have to write on your flyer digitally altered, AI enhanced, and then you need to provide them access to the original photo. Now, I suppose you could do that by putting the original photo right next to it. It doesn't say that it has to be the same size. We could find out later whether or not they have a problem with that. Or, says the statute, you could provide a QR code or a web link that says to access the original photo, go here. So you and your marketing team need to work on this. This is also a problem with your social media, your Facebook post, your Instagram, your website, where you show photos of this property, right? And the MLS.
Dan, do you know if it would be enough if in your agent remarks on the MLS listing, if an agent were to put the disclaimer that some images are digitally enhanced or AI created, and then also in that note say that the linked single property website contains the unaltered images, and then put those images on the uh,
I love it.
external website?
I love it, except it doesn't quite do what the statute says and definitely doesn't do what your local MLS says. And so in a moment, we're going to show what your local MLS says. One of the problems right now is that the MLSs are all a little different. And so because I work throughout the state, I've been having to gather up which ones are doing what. And so if we slip forward three slides, maybe four, to one that says San Francisco MLS. We're going to see what our MLS is doing. And so, yep, keep going. Keep going. One more. Hello, San Francisco MLS. By the way, this is AB Assembly Bill 723. I showed you the B&P code, Business and Professions Code. The way these laws work is they start as a bill. Remember, I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill. I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. And then hopefully someday they make you into a law. And then they take AB, Assembly Bill 723, and they turn it into a law, and they quote unquote codify it. And this one was codified as in code, Business and Profession Code, section 10140.6, just so you know how that works. All right, now, what does San Francisco do? So San Francisco is taking advantage of something that Rapatoni, our MLS, is allowing to happen. And a bunch of MLSs are taking advantage of this. When you're uploading photos, there's going to be a question. Was this AI generated or digitally enhanced? If you check the box yes, it gets a label that says AI generated or digitally enhanced. Then the next thing you're supposed to do is upload the next photo to be the original photo. Some MLSs are allowing you to add a QR code that says for all the digitally enhanced photos, please go here, as you suggested, right? So right now, the agent in our SFAR MLS is supposed to be checking the box, and soon it will upload that concept, AI generated or enhanced. If the box isn't there today, I'm told it may or may not be, should be by the middle of the month. Then you in the photo description should be saying digitally enhanced AI generated, one of those. Okay. You could say that and then describe the room, right? Lovely living room, blah, 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 blah. Components of this photo were AI generated, digitally enhanced. You could totally do that. Then the next photo needs to be the original. So you could upload a QR code on the AI photo that links to the unedited original. That would be great as a solution if you can do that. So if you can figure out how to upload a QR code onto the original photo, or the next photo is a QR code that links to the original, you can also do that. Let's see how it plays out. The manual way is what's in the box at the bottom of this slide. So you manually upload the photo, you write AI generated, digitally enhanced, and then you upload the original image immediately following. SFAR, I promise you, is having a bunch of videos. They will be happening this month, right? And so if this is an issue for you at this moment, here's the easy thing to do, which is the AI generated or digitally enhanced. You label it, then you put the original photo next. It's just getting the original photo, which is also half the problem here, right? So it's a real interesting discussion with your photographer ahead of time, right? Your photographer needs to understand, hey, there's a new requirement here. I totally want you to do some of this work. Some of this work may be more than light balance. Let me give you the examples of things that don't require this. Normal non-misleading edits, quote, exposure, lighting, white balance, sharpening, cropping, straightening, standard cosmetic adjustments. Okay. So that's the concept of what doesn't require this label and the new photo. So if you and your photographer have decided to do more, then you need to remind your photographer, I need that original unadulterated photo. So when you send me the proofs of the great new creation that you've done, for all of those that are AI generated or enhanced, please put right next to them the original so I can upload them like that. Okay?
Great.
All right.
Dan, just to keep us on track, we should probably move on to
I
the
agree.
next law, but just to answer Mary's question, these slides will be made available. Yes, Dan?
I'm perfectly happy to do that. Sure.
Great. So SFAR will reach out to the attendees of this webinar with that information. And let's keep on going. Oh, Eve Combs says a question. What if the listing is pulled from the MLS by Realtor.com or Zillow?
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm glad she did ask that, and that was in one of our slides. So you're not in charge of all the downstream stuff, right? So it's very possible that when this gets syndicated, that's what we're talking about, right? Syndication, VOW or IDX. It's possible that through that process, your QR code, your a descriptive um, description of the photo that says AI generated might go away. You're not responsible for that. It would be nice if it didn't. Why? Because you have an obligation to present a true picture of the property. You're assuming that a prospective buyer has been told that this isn't the true picture of the property, right? And you are opening yourself and your client up to, frankly, litigation later when they say, hey, we were deceived. And you're like, oh, I didn't deceive anybody. And they show the Zillow or wherever they found it that has no reference to it whatsoever. That is and could be a problem.
Great.
Also, you should know that at least our MLS, they're not going to be the picture police. Okay, so this is a law. They expect that you're going to follow it, but they're not the picture police. They don't have a fine schedule. CRMLS, the biggest one in the state, also doesn't have a fine schedule. It's possible they will in the future, but they don't now. The Department of Real Estate doesn't and hasn't promulgated regulations yet. I predict in the next 6 months they will. They may be a big deal. They may be a slap on the wrist. We'll see what they do. Okay.
Lightning round, Dan. Flames in a fireplace that are digitally enhanced or created, that would be a yes.
My concern there would be, I have no problem with that if you could actually make a fire in that fireplace. So if you could make a fire in that fireplace and it just happened not to have been on at the moment those pictures were taken, that's fine. But if that fireplace is not capable of fire, that's definitely AI photo enhanced.
Right, but one could argue also that the presence of a flames in a firebox in a photo would suggest that that chimney is known to be operational, and
Totally.
most of the time sellers are not getting those inspections done prior to sale.
Here's all I have to say. If the clients can and do make fires in that fireplace, you could say to them, prove it, right? You sit in the living room, you have a conversation, there's a fire in the fireplace. Great, put it out. And when the photographer shows up 2 days later and it's hot, I think that this would not be an overreach, personally.
hmm
Okay.
hmm So we have some questions about just kind of getting in the weeds of very specific things that people might do to alter photos, like taking away lamp cords or electrical poles in front of the house. Would the good rule of thumb be when in doubt, include the disclaimer and the original photo?
I'm afraid that it would.
Okay,
I'm afraid that it would. Yeah.
great. Okay, well, why don't we move on to the next one in the interest of time? Yes, this is a hot topic, but I think we're sitting on a bunch of them today.
Okay, so this one is important for us. So, starting in all of California on January 1st, 2026, which was last week, this week, earlier this week, whatever that is. It was and is a requirement that all HOAs that have three or more units and have elevated balconies made of wooden structures that are 6 foot or more off the ground, or elevated stairways or elevated walkways that meet those requirements have had them inspected and a representative sample and a report. And if that report noted certain damage, that damage was taken care of immediately, something was filed with the city, et cetera, et cetera. It's got specific requirements. Now, San Francisco's actually had that requirement for a while. So this isn't new. Here's the thing that's new. There's been a real frustration from buyers and sometimes from listing agents. They asked for, in anticipation of the buyer asking for, or the lender asking for, or the supplemental insurance policy holder asking for a copy of that report. And the HOA says, no, the Davis Sterling Act says exactly what we have to give. And it's 10 things, and one of them is not this report. Now, is it reflected in some of our other reports? Most likely. For instance, a reserve study, right? So if the balconies all need to be fixed and they have an estimate that it's $500,000 and they've updated their reserve study, will there be reference to it? Yeah, there will. But that's not the same as giving the actual report. So CAR sponsored this legislation. The state passed this legislation, and there is now an actual civil code that says the HOA must give as part of their HOA documents. So when they're giving 1 year meeting minutes, when they're giving CC&Rs, the bylaws, when they're giving the reserve study, um, they'll also be giving you, if they have one, a copy of the actual report. And that report has to have a summary page that has also been codified or standardized. Okay. And so now your client has something they can look at. Now the lender has something that they can look at. Okay. That's what that law is. Good.
Do you have any thoughts on how proactive an agent might be, let's say a buyer agent might be in getting that report into an insurance broker's hand
So what's interesting
in that
about this,
process?
well, here's what's interesting about this. Because this is with an HOA, Jeremy, right? So this now requirement is for an HOA. So this would be different if it's a 3-unit building. So you're buying a 4-unit apartment building, let's say. That 4-unit apartment building also has to have complied with this. I'm going to bet a lot of them won't, but they're supposed to. So you as an agent representing buyer one need to know that and point that out to your client if there isn't one. You'll see in the purchase agreement that there's reference to this requirement. And let's find out if they actually met it. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. If they didn't, there's all kinds of questions for your clients in terms of liability, et cetera. But those are decisions your client will make.
Mhm.
In those circumstances, is it very possible that the insurance company or the lender who's aware of this law will want to ask for it? Yes. And so if you remove your insurance contingency or your finance contingency without having them um, specifically tell you, hey, we're not concerned with any balcony reports, right? Then there's clearly a danger. And so what you might need to do is conditionally remove either of those, right? So the finance contingency is conditionally removed subject to lender's approval of the balcony report, right? Or likewise, the insurance contingency is removed subject to the insurance company's review of the report. That gets tricky for an HOA. You think your client is well qualified, but we've always had this problem and it's become more of a problem lately. The lender says we're not happy with the insurance coverage, right? And so before we're removing our now separate insurance contingency and our separate lender contingency, what I always do is I recommend to our clients when they're representing a buyer purchasing an HOA property to say, hey, I'm going to remove the lender contingency, the finance contingency, subject to the lender's approval of the HOA and the HOA insurance, right? And if they're not satisfied, we have a way out. And so when the seller grumbles about that, the answer is you're going to have that problem with every single buyer who's not paying
Exactly.
cash,
Exactly.
right? So you might as well work with us. We need another 5 days. Okay.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you, Dan. What's
Okay.
next?
Next is a funny one. So I know what firsthand smoke is. That's me smoking. Secondhand smoke is you smoking, and I'm breathing it in, which, by the way, is a huge problem for me. I'm an asthmatic. Walking around Europe, just in the streets, difficult for me because of all the smoke in the air. Third hand smoke was a new concept to me. It's the concept that someone smoked in this apartment previously, right? And there's a residue of it. And so here's the example: a cheap ass motel room or a rental car, and you get in and you know someone has smoked in that previously, right? That's the concept. So there's now a law that says the seller must actually disclose actual knowledge of any residue from smoking tobacco or nicotine products. And so that would include vaping and any history of occupants smoking tobacco or nicotine products. Definition: residue from smoking tobacco, chemical accumulation in carpets, walls, furniture, building materials, persists for years after smoking stops, can be detected via smell or tests showing nicotine on surfaces or dust. So don't get the test. If you do get the test, you'll have to disclose it. If your client knows that the prior occupants themselves, their mother-in-law who lived there, their tenants who lived there, smoked, you need to disclose it. The TDS doesn't have a particular question about this. CARS SPQ has been updated. The San Francisco seller disclosure, I looked at it a couple days ago. Question B13 is the question about smoking. It isn't quite sufficient. So you need to be liberal when you're sitting with your clients and they're answering that question, B13, about smoking. What that question is worded as now is it asks if smoking adversely impacts the property, as though there's a neighbor who's smoking all the time and it's wafting in, right? Or there are people who stand outside the property and smoke. It doesn't quite get to this. So our forms committee, I'm sure will update that soon. But in the meantime, when you get to that question, remember to say to your client, the seller, hey, did you guys smoke here? Did other people who lived here smoke here? We need to disclose that. There's a state law. Okay.
Great.
Interestingly, not required for leases. Why tenants don't get this protection, I'm not sure, but they don't.
And what about this particular bill? Is it limited to only tobacco and nicotine products? What about other kinds of smokables?
I would say for other kind of smokables, the idea is material fact or defect, right? And so it's also interesting where you live and what you do. When I bought rental properties in Salt Lake City, they tested for methamphetamine, very regular test. In fact, it turns out it's a state law to test for methamphetamine. And by the way, the answer was it's totally been smoked there, but never produced there. And if it's produced there, it's a whole different ballgame and a whole different set of cleaning up things. But either way, it's the question I think would be material fact, right? To what extent is there residue? This sets a new standard for that, which could harm someone in the future.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, this one I want you to understand, not because it applies to us, but because these kind of things may apply to us in the future. So if you are in the Los Angeles area, in fact, what is today's date? Today's the 5th, right? The firestorm was the 7th. And so what's interesting is today, 1 year ago today, my wife and I were driving to LA to visit all of our LA agency offices. And we were there during the firestorm. And the hotel that we were in filled up in an instant with people who were fleeing from the Palisades fire. Um, we were on the next hill over. And because we didn't need to be there, we left as early as we could in the morning when we realized what was happening so someone could take our room. And so at 7 in the morning when we left, someone took our room. And it was interesting. Everybody had a dog. Anyhow, that was 1 year ago today. And what happened? Many emergency orders, some interesting in particular emergency orders. Most of those emergency orders still exist. Some were taken away and put back. As an impact on some of that is the price gouging law. And so the price gouging law currently exists for all of LA County and other limited counties because of a recent declaration of emergency declared by the governor. He withdrew the original emergency order, and the LA County decided to have one on their own. They also have a somewhat unique emergency order that talks about unsolicited offers being prohibited. And here's the concept, just so you understand it. For those zip codes on the screen, and only those zip codes, you can't make an unsolicited offer to purchase the property, even if your offer is at market price. The idea is that these people have suffered, they're traumatized, they're not in their right mind when it comes to this real estate, and you are more likely to prey on them than not, and you can't make an unsolicited offer. You, as a realtor, could go to any of these homeowners and say, hey, do you want to sell? I could be your realtor and list this for you. Could list it on the MLS, try to get you market price, tell you what market price is, right? But you can't go to that same person and say, I have a buyer, my buyer wants to make an offer, and you can't make an offer. And if you do, that offer can be rescinded, and there are all kinds of penalties. So the next 3 or 4 slides are all about that. I just want you to be aware of these kinds of things. Okay. All right. Let's move forward 3 or 4 slides. and keep going. And then one more. And just to show you, this is an attestation. Each time one of these properties sells, they're recording this with a chain of title that says, I was aware of this law. I didn't make an unsolicited offer. If this was an unsolicited offer and I'm lying here, that's a separate crime. And the seller can rescind this transaction within whatever, 90 days or something. Okay. All right. One more. And then finally, one more. Okay. So let's get back to buyer representation agreements. So the BRBC, as we know it, right? Our buyer representation agreement. Remember that that thing started as an NAR settlement, right? And had particular requirements. And then Carr solicited the legislature, encouraging them to make this basically a law. Why? Because the NRR settlement didn't apply to all licensees. And so we had a strange playing field where the realtors had to comply, but the non-realtors, which is 300,000 more licensees, there's 200,000 agents, 500,000 licensees in California, the others didn't have to comply. And so, in fact, they did impose a law, but that law was slightly different from ours. And so now the question was, well, can we somewhat standardize it? And so they lobbied the legislature again and the Department of Real Estate to adjust their standards. And that's what's happened. And so if we look at the next slide, oh, let's just stay here for 1 minute. Sorry, Genevieve. So broker representation agreements, just to remind you the current state of the law, a BRBC is required as soon as practicable, but no later than the execution of the buyer's offer to purchase. That's what the state law says. What does ours say? Before you show the property, right? So there's a distinction there. It applies to all transactions, residential, 5+ units, commercial, land, mobile homes. So broad. There's a 3-month limit. Ours says 90 days. Why does that matter? Well, it matters when leap year is in there and it gets a little confusing. Okay. It says it may be renewed for additional 90-day periods, but it doesn't say much more about how you do that. And it says it's a licensing violation for failure to comply. Okay, let's see what's changed slightly. Next slide.
Dan, I have two quick questions about that. So I thought that the 3 months was actually being changed to 90 days to allow for the actual day count to matter. And then can you go back one slide, Genevieve? I'm sorry.
This slide that we're looking at, Jeremy, is the day before New Year's. This is December 31st law. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
you're right about that 3 months. So the December 31st law said 3 months.
Okay. And then another question that comes up a lot is, does a BRBC period need to encompass the entire length of escrow?
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide. Remind me to answer that last one for you. Okay, so how do we amend it? The first thing is the 3 months is now 90 days. So they're literally defining 3 months as 90 days. Okay, so that will be helpful in counting. Can you delay the 90 days? Can you say, Jeremy, I'm signing a BRBC with you, and it's going to be for 90 days, but it starts in 22 days? Yes, you can do that. But it can only be 90 days. The good news is 90 days from the day that it starts. Okay. Can you have an auto renewal? And so you add additional terms. And at the end of the 90 days, it will automatically renew. Answer, no. No auto renewals. Can you, in the middle of these 90 days, tack on another 90 days? Sort of. So if on day 88, you want to pull out the MT, modification of terms, -BR, broker representation, and amend it to add another 90 days, you totally can do that. But you're not adding it to when this one ends. You're adding it to when it gets signed today, so that at no time can you have a BRBC that's for more than 90 days. Okay. The good news is Carr has changed their form that says, and if you screw it up and put in more than 90 days, it's limited to 90 days rather than being void. Okay, it just peels it back by contract law. Okay. Now, what about an exception? What if your buyer is a trust? There is no exception, still 90 days. What if your buyer is a corporation or an LLC? Yes. If your buyer is a corporation or an LLC, you can have 180 days. You can have probably a 2 year agreement. I would probably not go longer than 2 years. The only reason I mentioned 2 years is because that's the standard at law for a listing agreement. I don't know if you remember that. So if your client is corporation or LLC, you can go longer. But what's interesting is who's the client is the issue, not what property. So it doesn't matter if you're looking to buy residential, a mobile home, or a 50-story um, uh, um, 50-story office tower downtown, right? It depends who the buyer is. If it's an individual buyer, oddly enough, buying a 50-story office tower, you're limited to 90 days. Most likely, that's going to be a LLC or a corporation, and you can have it for longer. Okay.
Dan, Mimi has a question. What if you meet clients, you don't have a BRBC signed, they go independently to see a property at an open house or whatever, and then after that, you subsequently sign a BRBC and then draft an offer for them on that particular property that they saw. Is that order of operations kosher?
100% kosher. And what you might also be doing is it's possible that you're drafting your BRBC to specifically apply only to that property, right? Maybe the concept for these people is they've been looking somewhere else, but they happen to have seen this one property that they think's perfect. And if they can get this one property, they're interested in it. Maybe they already have a BRBC signed with somebody else for a different area,
Mhm.
right? Would it be wrong for you to sign for this area? No, it would not, right? And so maybe it's just for this house. Perfectly.
Another question that comes up a lot is what if you know that in this particular party of buyers that you're working with, right? You know that the stakeholder here, the only principal in the party is, let's say, Janet.
Mhm.
Janet's going to pay for it. Janet's going to be on title. Her partner Bob is not going to be on, not going to be on title, not going to be on the contract. And what if their mom happens to be with them that day that you're going to go look at 10 properties? Who needs to be on that BRBC?
I would say Janet. If Janet is married to partner Bob, I would certainly encourage that person to be on it unless they gave me a lot of pushback and said she's the only one who's going to be on any of the paperwork, then I would relent and leave them off. But either way, I would not be worried about the mother or the children, even if the children are adults, if they're not going to be on title and they're not going to be your clients. But don't treat them like your clients later on, right? And if Janet is the only one who is your client, then you're not sending emails that include Bob unless she has directed you in writing to do that. Okay.
What if Janet and Bob are married and what what legal status here trumps the other? Is it the fact that they're married and there's community property at the end of the day here, or does the BRB is the BRBC limited just to the agency that we're dealing with here in the real estate realm?
Yeah, I would not be very worried about the community property concept. I would be asking, Bob, why is it that you're not going to sign this? Because I'm not on any of the paperwork. Okay, I'm fine with you not being on the paperwork, but you need to understand that then you're not my client. My fiduciary duty is going to be to Janet. I'm going to send you something that says non-agency dash buyer, and I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to ask you to confirm that says, hey, as you've told me, you're not a buyer, you're not a principal. My fiduciary duties are only to Janet, and only to the extent that Janet allows me to communicate with you, will I be communicating with you. Are we all good with that? Otherwise, why don't we just sign this?
Great. And then I know a lot of us ask for a BRBC with the offer to be submitted so that we can verify that agreed upon amount, that it matches what the buyer might be asking for in the purchase agreement. Do you have anything to say about that practice?
Yeah, I tell my clients we're not the BRBC police. I wouldn't want to do it, and I'm not suggesting that my agents do it. Um,
But as we said before, we're not espousing any particular process or practice among brokerages. It's a question that comes up and that we're
Sure.
looking at
And
it.
for my agents, I say that CAR has done a lot to try to shield you from taking on that obligation. The forms have been rejiggered to make it a lot easier for you to not take on additional obligations. And I'm encouraging you not to take on that obligation. I'm saying to my agents and to tell your client that, hey, this is all about net price, right? And so they're asking you to pay some closing cost is what it is, right? You calculate the net price. Let's worry about that. If the net price doesn't work for you, then let's counter up the price. But I don't really care how they allocate those funds. They have their own legal requirements. I'm going to assume they're complying with their legal requirements.
Great. Okay, we have about 20 more minutes.
Yep.
Where are
Here we
we
go.
going next?
Okay. So one other thing you need to know about the BRBC is that now the state law says that everybody has to get it signed before they show the property, right? There's a presumption that they are able to do that before they sell the property. All right. Defensible space zone 0. This is the last of the non-landlord tenant laws. So there isn't a new law yet that affects you, but there very well may be soon. And so for those properties that are in a high or very high fire hazard zone where the TDS applies, right? And where there's some local defensible space requirement, and this is a lot of the state, and it's growing. Still a minority of the state, but it's growing. And it doesn't yet include San Francisco, from what I understand. Then you have to comply with AB 38. And the preliminary title report on the page that shows you what the hazard zones are has a very convenient checkbox now that says it is or isn't in this AB 38 fire hazard zone. If it is, then you need to comply. What is compliance? Well, compliance is all about defensible space. How is defensible space changing? Well, because of a lot of studies that have been done, in the very near future, there will be new requirements for defensible space zone 0. Zone 0 is being defined as the property and 5 feet out. And what is often in that space? Oftentimes there are fences that are connected to the property that are wooden and allow, for instance, fire to spread easily from the end of the property where that fence is into the property because of that fence, right? Interestingly, there are sometimes PVC pipes that are in those 5 feet that go into the property. PVC is made of oil and apparently it burns. And so fire spreads that way. So we should be on the lookout soon for defensible space zone 0 requirements. They don't exist yet today. Next slide. All right, we're going to talk about landlord laws. And the first one is habitability. So when you think about habitability, Jeremy, you often think, okay, I definitely need heat, right? I need windows, I need ingress and egress, I need fresh air, right? What else do I need? I thought you needed cooking. I thought a stove was required. Maybe it wasn't. It certainly is now. Stoves and refrigerators. This one, the emphasis has been on refrigerators, not on stoves, because apparently most people are complying with a stove requirement already. But this is expanded to also say that a refrigerator in good working order, capable of safely storing food. But it doesn't say a freezer and it doesn't say what size. Penalties. The penalties are interesting. The tenant may exercise remedies as with any habitability violation, potentially withholding rent, terminating the lease and vacating, repair and deducting, suing for damages. So what do you need to do as a landlord? Next slide. You need to provide a refrigerator. What if they're already in and I don't have a refrigerator? Am I violating the law? No. If they were in before January 1st and there was no refrigerator, you're not violating the law. But you may be soon. If you re-up the rent, I'm sorry, re-up the lease, so not simply they go month to month, but you sign them to an extension, or for all new leases entered into as of January 1st, or you raise the rent. Any of those things, re-up them for another year, raise the rent, change the conditions of the lease, sign a new lease after January 1st, requires the refrigerator. Now, if they're already in, it's actually up to them to ask you for it, and they have 30 days to demand a refrigerator. There's also a component of the law that says if the tenant wants to provide their own refrigerator, they can do that. You just have to agree to it in writing. CAR and the San Francisco Apartment Association have already updated all their forms. There are references to the landlord. There's actually a box in the lease to check that says landlord will be providing a refrigerator, or tenant, by checking this box, says that's okay. I don't need one. I don't want one. I'll do it myself. Okay. That's the refrigerator law. Next one. Security deposits. You got to give it back the way that you got it. And so, specifically, if you receive the security deposit through an electronic funds transfer, then writing them a check doesn't work. Paying them in cash doesn't work. Providing them with many, many rolls of pennies doesn't work. You need to send it back to them electronically. And
What about a Buffalo nickel?
depending on how expensive that Buffalo nickel is, maybe only one, but
Hmm.
also wouldn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Baked goods.
Baked goods totally works if that's the way they paid their deposit.
That's how I pay my deposits.
I, I'm all for it. As a landlord, I'd be good with that. Okay, next one. If there is a disaster, so what constitutes a disaster? That's a good question. The obvious are earthquake, flood, and fire. And the house is torn apart as a result. What's interesting is the destruction of the property by law relieves both the tenant and the landlord of the obligation to rent and provide the property. So when the property is destructed, the lease basically goes up in flames too. Um, but what's interesting now is with this new law, it says, well, wait a minute, what if they're still there, but it's has debris, it's dilapidated, there's smoke residue, there's ash, there's runoff. Can the tenant stay and the landlord has to deal with this? And the answer is yeah, apparently so. So this law gets at the tenant staying and the landlord having to resolve those kinds of issues. And non-compliance is a habitability thing. So we're back to withholding rent, terminating the lease, etc. And so what does this say for landlords? This says you better have the right insurance. And here's a little tip for all of our agents. When you put a client in a house and they live there, and then they come to you and say, hey, we want you to find us a new house. And you say, fantastic, let's talk about listing the old one. And they say, no, 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 no. We want you to get us tenants for that. We're going to hold on to that. That is the time to remind that client that the insurance that they currently have on that property is a homeowner's policy. It is not a landlord policy. And if they rent that property and then there's a disaster, I promise you, you know what's going to happen? The insurance company will know because they will do some research and they will find out that you were not living there and they will not pay you a nickel because you had the wrong insurance policy. When you move out and you start renting it, you need a different policy. It's not a homeowner's policy, it's a landlord renter policy, landlord policy. Um, and it's more expensive, right? But it covers different things. And some of the things that it covers is lost rent and these remediation issues. Okay.
Thank you, Dan. A couple quick things. This slide should say 2026 at the top, correct?
Yes.
And what about mold infestation as a result of water damage? Disaster is probably defined narrowly.
Yeah. So I wonder why the word mold is not there or toxic runoff. I don't know why the word mold is not in there. What I'm suggesting is I cut and pasted from the car abbreviated description of the law without actually looking at SB 610.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
don't know if SB 610, somebody asked Google if SB 610 includes specifically the word mold and then let
And,
us.
and there might be a very specific definition of disaster.
Yeah, so I know that it covers the big three, fire, um,
Flood.
flood and earthquake, but does a disaster need to be declared? I can't remember that either.
And flooding is not necessarily a pipe bursting in the upstairs unit.
Right.
Okay. So that would be something for people to kind of keep in mind, right?
By the way, if this was our insurance class, we would talk about the difference between flooding and water intrusion. So when it comes from the bottom up because of rains, that's flooding. When it comes through the roof because of a bad rainstorm and a hole in the roof, that's actually covered. There's a difference. All right.
Great. And just a little, I mean, can you just put a little disclaimer out there about agents needing to stay in their own lane when they're advising clients, right? That agents are not really to determine what and what isn't when it comes to these things, and they need to pursue professional insurance guidance.
I think what's really helpful here is to say, as I often do, Jeremy, oh, wait a minute, there's something about that, right? So a notice of default has been issued against the property and now we're selling it. Isn't there some rule about that? Yeah, there is. Let me go look it up, right? And so you're having a conversation with your client and you're like, oh, insurance. I know there are a lot of things to consider when we are no longer a homeowner and you're interested in renting. Before you sign a lease, in fact, maybe even immediately after we sign this lease listing agreement, call your insurance broker, tell them what your plans are, right? I'd be happy to be on that call with you, and then we can find out how that changes things. Okay.
Great.
All right. All right.
Linda, thank you for posting that, by the way, in the Q&A. Okay, what's next? We have about we're shy of 10 minutes, so we're kind of answering questions as we go. So why don't we just continue to let her rip?
What was the rule? Did somebody answer our last one, SB 610 mold?
The text of the bill and the various analyses of it explicitly list mold as an environmental hazard that landlords are responsible for remediating after a natural disaster. So there's that
Thank you.
definition.
I will change the slide accordingly. Okay, great. Air conditioning. At this moment, air conditioning is not required. It's not an issue of habitability. I will predict that within a year, there will be a law that talks about phasing in the requirement to keep a residence that is a lease no hotter than a certain temperature. And that obviously will require air conditioning in some circumstances, right? But maybe not all.
Well, and we've been seeing that in a lot of buildings in the city, right? That the south facing side of buildings, and we're seeing SB 800 suits happening, with big, some really large scale remediation, whether it's building wide or just in those south facing units. But that's been a real common problem that's affected both sales and lending for years.
Yeah, but the idea that you as a landlord now have this obligation is and will be quite new and possibly very expensive.
Yeah.
So imagine that there is just plain a statewide statute that says that you have to make sure the place doesn't get hotter than 84 degrees, right? And you're in San Francisco. Does that mean I have to install air conditioning because twice in the last 8 years? So I have a feeling that with CAR's help, if there is such a bill, it will say something more like in those regions designated as having temperatures on average above this so many days per year, you are required to include conditioning of the air that allows them to blah, blah, blah. Right. I think
It would also be interesting to, just thinking about the specific property types we have in the city, right? A lot of these attic conversions have no insulation on the, on that upper level or at all. So
yeah,
it would
it's
be
amazing
interesting.
how hot it gets. And you literally climb into the attic, you're like, holy shit, it's hot. Yeah.
Even on a cool day.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, we're almost done. That was air conditioning. The next one is another landlord tenant issue defense to non-payment. So remember during COVID, if your if the tenant had lost their job, for instance, that was a defense to non-payment of the rent, and then they kept changing those bills, but that was a thing, right? So there's now a state law that says as a defense to non-payment of rent, meaning you can't be evicted if you're stopped paying your rent because your Social Security dependents benefits were delayed. What does delayed mean? You have to really look into this law. Will this affect a lot of us? Probably not. But it's interesting that they decided this, right? It's just one more bill that's trying to protect tenants. right? And as a landlord, this is, you know what I love to do with this, Jeremy? I have a list of all of these things that a landlord has to do, and particularly in San Francisco. And I like to use that list for the agent who's sitting down with somebody when they're gonna buy the new property and they think they're gonna hold on to the old property and rent. I'm like, do you know what it means to be a landlord? I got an idea. Let's list this house. You want to be a landlord? Go buy in Kentucky. It's really easy to be a landlord there. All right. Last two more slides. Substituted service of process, tightening the rules. So, what is substituted service of process? Well, what is service of process? Service of process is the old-fashioned, you've been served and someone has handed you legal documents, right? It's a notice of a lawsuit against you. Okay. What's the lawsuit in the landlord-tenant context? It's the notice of the eviction, right? And so, how do we serve that? So there's something called substituted service. Believe it or not, in some circumstances, you could serve it in the newspaper. That was a thing. Sometimes you can tack it to the door. Sometimes you can leave it at their work with another adult. Sometimes you can serve them at that property via US mail. You don't need to know any of this. All you need to know is one more law that is trying to benefit the tenants, those rules that allow for substituted service as opposed to handing it to them in purpose have become more strict, and therefore there will be more evictions that are thrown out for failure to have complied with the strict rules of personal service. And then finally, Jeremy, I have included a slide that may not seem real estate related, but it is. And here's why. A lot of you have teams, and some of you have agents who are not licensed, right? And you're paying them. They are employees. Don't fool yourself and think that they're independent contractors. They're employees. You need to treat them as an employee, or someday when they hate you, they will file a claim and get a lot of back pay and benefits, and you'll have to pay a lot of taxes to the government that you never paid. How much do they need to be paid? Well, at the very minimum, $16.90 an hour. Can you pay
And
them?
since this is a can of worms that you've opened up at 1:58 p.m., uh, where might agents go to get some really good professional guidance on this topic?
Yeah. So if you go to car.org, you click on the risk management tab, you can search their Q&As and their quick guides, search for independent contractor, employee, also search for what a unlicensed assistant can do and not do, because you always violate all of those together. Okay?
Great. And then one more question from Linda LeBlanc.
Mhm.
It's a little bit off topic, but not entirely, about the new referral disclosure form. I think it's
Yeah,
the RAD, the RAD form, if I'm not
that's exactly right.
mistaken. It's totally rad. Linda asks, is the disclosure form required with every transaction? And is it necessary, I mean, ostensibly where there's a referral fee involved. And is it necessary for agents who work on teams and are under the compensation of the lead agent?
Okay, so good questions. Two things. One is it's not a referral fee in terms of what's required for referral fees if it's not between brokers. So it needs to be two different brokerages. Your broker can do whatever they want with their fee. They can divide it up however they want, and you don't need to disclose that. Okay, so that's your team concern. Um, the other thing to understand about the referral fee is that there's more than one way to make that disclosure. This has always been a rule. And what's interesting is I can give you the backstory of why it's an issue now, but before it became an issue, I was the chair of the forms committee for 2025 last week, in fact. And we independently about a year ago said, you know, there's a rule, an NAR Code of Ethics rule and a state law that says definitely every time you receive a referral fee, and very possibly every time you pay a referral fee, you have to disclose that to your client, that you're doing that and how much. And I'm doing it, but I'm doing it in an email. Do we want a form? And we started to decide whether or not we wanted a form. You don't need to use that form. You just need to make that disclosure. So it could be on an email. And so if I send Jeremy a client, what I do is I say in the email, Sarah, I want you to meet Jeremy Davidson. He's a great realtor. I used to work with him when I was at Compass. I really trust him. A great guy. I want you to work with him. There are many other good agents, but this is one that I think would be great for you. Here's an introduction. And by the way, he will be paying me an X% referral fee. That's what I do on my opening email. Another way to do that would be when Jeremy and I sign the referral fee, send it to the client, ask them to initial it, right? A third way would be to use that RAD form. One of the important things to remember, though, is if you're taking a listing or you're representing a buyer and that buyer or that seller came to you from someone else, so it was a referral to you, you're paying the referral fee. We think you also have an obligation then to disclose it under the Code of Ethics. And we think the best, and because of the scrutiny that we're all under for, we think this is the next lawsuit under this whole scrutiny for commission transparency. And we think you need to do that before you sign that BRBC or before you sign the listing agreement. Why? Because that client may say to you, I'm sorry, you're paying a referral fee to Jeremy? How much? No, no fucking way. That money needs to stay with me. You discount me this BRBC agreement or you discount me this listing. Don't pay Jeremy. I talked to that guy for 5 minutes. He doesn't deserve X%. No, I'm not doing it. That's the next lawsuit. Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Really quick question. Is a BRBC needed to show your own listing to somebody else's buyers if
Oh,
their
this is
agent
great.
is not there?
Thank you so much. So on that slide that we went past on the BRBC, one of the items is, in fact, that the state reminds us that when you are the listing agent at your own open house, you're not representing the buyer. You don't need a buyer representation agreement. If a buyer calls you on your own listing and says, I'd like you to show me the house, you don't need a BRBC. The moment you start having conversations with them about representing them, right, as opposed to showing them the house, right, that becomes a different conversation. Okay.
Great.
All right. All right. We did it.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
we did it. Thank you, Dan. That was a really wonderful, detailed presentation. We love having you every year, and such great questions from our amazing agents here in the city. Thank you so much. And again, this will be available in the SFAR video library. And thank you so much. We'll
Thank you,
see you
Jeremy.
next year.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.